The morning sun had barely crested the eastern ridge when Fiona Crawford saw him for the first time, a mountain of a man shouldering a massive pine log as though it weighed no more than kindling, his long dark hair tied back with a leather cord and muscles straining beneath his sweat-soaked shirt. She froze in the doorway of her father's general store in Llano, Texas, the broom forgotten in her hands as she watched him carry that timber across the dusty main street toward an empty lot at the edge of town where nothing had stood for as long as she could remember. It was May of 1878, and Fiona had lived in this small Texas hill country town her entire 22 years, but she had never seen anyone quite like him. He set the log down with careful precision, straightened his back, and wiped his brow with his forearm, before turning to head back toward the tree line beyond town where more timber waited. Fiona found herself stepping out onto the wooden sidewalk, shading her eyes against the climbing sun, watching as his broad-shouldered form disappeared into the scrub oak and juniper that dotted the rocky hills. Her father emerged from inside the store, adjusting his spectacles as he followed her gaze. "That would be Emmett Jensen," her father said, his voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone he used when discussing the weather or the price of flour. "Came down from the mountains up north about a week ago. Been camping out by Hickory Creek. Bought himself that lot from the widow Morrison. Says he is building something." "Building what?" Fiona asked, unable to keep the curiosity from her voice. Her father shrugged. "Didn't say. But he has been hauling timber from sunup to dark every day since. Man works like nothing I have ever seen. Bought supplies from me twice already. Pays in gold coin, hardly says 3 words, then goes right back to work." Fiona swept the sidewalk that morning with only half her attention, the other half drifting repeatedly toward that empty lot where the growing pile of carefully cut and stripped timber logs lay stacked in neat rows. By noon, the mountain man had returned with another impossibly large log balanced on his shoulder, his muscular arms holding it steady as he walked with a purposeful stride that spoke of strength built over years of hard labor in unforgiving country. She noticed the way his shirt clung to his chest and shoulders, the fabric dark with perspiration, and she felt her cheeks warm at her own brazenness in staring so openly. He worked through the heat of the day without pause, and Fiona found excuses to remain outside or near the front windows where she could observe him. Her father noticed but said nothing, though she caught him hiding a knowing smile behind his newspaper once when she invented a reason to rearrange the display of canned goods facing the street. By late afternoon, the mountain man had hauled at least a dozen more logs, each one looking as though it required the strength of 3 ordinary men to lift, yet he carried them alone with grim determination etched into his sun-weathered face. The next morning, Fiona rose even earlier than usual, dressing in her best calico work dress and taking extra care with her auburn hair before coming downstairs to help her father open the store. She told herself it had nothing to do with the mountain man, but when she saw him already at work across the street, his powerful frame silhouetted against the dawn light as he positioned timber with practiced efficiency, her heart quickened in her chest. She busied herself with morning tasks, sweeping, dusting, organizing shelves, but her eyes kept finding their way to the window. Around mid-morning, Emmett Jensen crossed the street and entered the store, ducking slightly through the doorway as though long accustomed to low ceilings built for smaller men. Up close, he was even more imposing than Fiona had realized, easily standing over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed to fill half the store. His face was handsome in a rugged way, all hard angles and weathered skin, with eyes the color of granite that held both intelligence and something else, something wounded and distant. Those eyes barely glanced at Fiona as he addressed her father. "Need some rope," he said, his voice deep and rough as though he did not use it often. "Heavy gauge, and nails, 2 pounds of the 4-inch. "Of course," her father said, moving to gather the requested items. "How is your building coming along?" "Coming," Emmett replied, which seemed to be the extent of his willingness to elaborate. Fiona stepped forward before she could stop herself. "It must be hard work, hauling all that timber alone. Can I get you some water, or perhaps something to eat? I just made fresh cornbread this morning." For the first time, those granite eyes focused fully on her, and Fiona felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to identify, before he gave a single short nod. "Water would be good, madam, thank you." She hurried to the back room where they kept a pitcher and clean cups, her hands trembling slightly as she poured the water. When she returned, her father was wrapping the rope and nails in brown paper, while making small talk that Emmett answered with monosyllables. Fiona offered the cup, and when Emmett took it, his calloused fingers briefly brushed hers, sending an unexpected jolt through her arm. He drank deeply, emptying the cup in several long swallows, then handed it back with another nod. "Appreciate it," he said, then paid for his supplies and left, the door closing softly behind him despite his size. "Quiet fellow," her father observed mildly, but polite enough. Fiona said nothing, watching through the window as Emmett returned to his work, immediately lifting another massive log with arms that seemed carved from the same timber he hauled. Something about him called to her, some combination of strength and solitude that made her want to know more, to understand what drove him to work with such relentless intensity and what shadows lurked behind those distant eyes. Over the following days, Fiona found opportunities to bring Emmett water and occasionally food, a biscuit, a piece of salt pork, leftovers from her own lunch that she claimed she could not finish. He always accepted with quiet gratitude, few words, then returned to his labor. She learned that he rose before dawn and worked until well after sunset, building what was gradually revealing itself to be a house, a substantial structure with careful joinery and solid craftsmanship that spoke of real skill. The frame began to take shape, massive corner posts set deep into the Texas limestone, crossbeams fitted with precision, walls rising board by board. One evening, as the sun sank toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Fiona brought him a full plate of supper, fried chicken and beans and fresh bread. She found him standing in the partial skeleton of his house, running his hand along a beam he had just secured, his expression distant and unreadable. He turned when she approached, surprise briefly crossing his features. "Thought you might be hungry," Fiona said, suddenly feeling foolish. "I made too much, and it seemed a shame to waste it." Emmett looked at the plate, then at her, and for a long moment she thought he might refuse. Then his features softened, just slightly, and he accepted it with both hands. "You are kind, Miss Crawford. Thank you. Please call me Fiona." He nodded slowly. "Fiona, then." "I am Emmett." "I know," she said, then felt her cheeks flush. "I mean, my father mentioned your name when you first arrived." Something that might have been amusement touched the corner of his mouth. "Reckon there is not much happens in a town this size that everyone does not know about." "That is true enough," Fiona admitted. She gestured toward the rising house. "It is looking wonderful. You do beautiful work." Emmett glanced at the structure, and again that distant look came over him. "Building is honest work. A man can see what he has accomplished at the end of the day. It is solid. It lasts. Is this your first house?" "No, madam." He set the plate down carefully on a sawbuck and picked up a cup of water she had brought along with the food. "Built 2 others, back in Colorado." "In the mountains. What brought you to Texas?" Fiona asked, unable to contain her curiosity. His jaw tightened, and she saw walls go up behind his eyes. Needed a change, needed to leave some things behind. The finality in his tone made it clear the subject was closed, and Fiona felt a pang of disappointment mixed with understanding. Everyone carried burdens, and not all of them were meant for sharing, especially not with a near stranger. "Well, Llano is a good town," she said gently. "I hope you will like it here." Emmett met her eyes again, and this time she saw something warmer there, something grateful. "I think I might, Fiona. I think I just might." She left him to his supper and walked back across the street as darkness settled over the town, but she felt his gaze on her back the entire way, and it made her skin tingle with awareness. That night, lying in bed in her small room above the store, she found herself thinking about the mountain man and his careful hands and his wounded eyes, wondering what had driven him down from the mountains and what he was really building in that empty lot. The house was taking shape with too much care, too much precision for it to be just a place to live. There was intention in every board he placed, every joint he fitted. It meant something to him, something important. The following weeks passed in a rhythm that became as natural to Fiona as breathing. Each morning, she watched Emmett begin his work, hauling timber from the hills, cutting and planing boards with hand tools, fitting each piece with painstaking attention. She brought him water when the Texas sun climbed high and merciless, brought him food when she could, always careful to make it seem casual rather than deliberate, though she suspected he saw through her pretense. He accepted her kindness with quiet gratitude and slowly, gradually began to open up in small ways. She learned he was 29 years old, that he had grown up in the Rockies, the son of a timberman who had taught him the trade from childhood. She learned he could read and write, unusual for someone who spent his life in manual labor, and that he had a love of poetry, though he admitted it with obvious embarrassment, as though expecting her to laugh. She did not laugh. She found it endearing. This mountain of a man with his massive shoulders and calloused hands, who could recite Longfellow from memory while cutting perfect dovetail joints. June arrived with its crushing heat, and Fiona began to notice something that sent a chill down her spine despite the temperature. 3 men had taken to loitering around town, drifters by the look of them, rough and mean-eyed, watching Emmett work with an interest that seemed more than casual. She mentioned it to her father, who frowned and admitted he had noticed them as well. They had been asking questions, wanting to know about the big man building the house, where he came from, whether he had any money. "I do not like it," her father said quietly one evening after closing the store. "Those are not good men, Fiona. They have that look about them. I am thinking I should warn Mr. Jensen." "I will do it," Fiona said quickly. "I am bringing him supper anyway." Her father studied her with knowing eyes but nodded. "Be careful, and come straight back." She found Emmett working on the roof frame, balanced on a beam 20 feet above the ground, with no apparent concern for the height. He climbed down when he saw her, moving with surprising grace for someone so large, and accepted the basket of food she offered. In the fading light, his face was streaked with sawdust and sweat, but he looked content in a way she had not seen before, as though the physical labor brought him peace. "Emmett," Fiona said, trying to keep her voice calm, "there are some men in town, 3 of them. They have been watching you, asking questions. I wanted you to know." His expression changed instantly, going hard and alert. "What kind of men?" "The bad kind," she said simply. "My father thinks they might be looking to cause trouble, maybe rob you." Emmett was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the darkening street. "I appreciate the warning. I will keep my eyes open." "Do you have a gun?" Fiona asked, then felt foolish. Of course he had a gun. Every man in Texas had a gun, but Emmett shook his head. "Left my weapons in Colorado. Did not want them anymore. Did not want to be that person anymore." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Fiona stepped closer, close enough to smell the honest scent of his sweat and the pine sap on his clothes. "What happened in Colorado, Emmett?" His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw real pain there, raw and deep. "I killed men. In a dispute over land, over timber rights. They came for me, and I defended myself, but when it was over, 3 of them were dead, and I had their blood on my hands. The law said it was justified, but that did not make me sleep any better at night. I built a house after that, built it for someone, thought maybe I could start over, be someone different. But she looked at me different after the killing, looked at me like I was something dangerous, something to fear. So I left. Came down here to try again, to build something with these hands that is not about death." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes at the rawness in his voice. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand, her small fingers barely wrapping around his massive palm. "You are not that person, Emmett. Anyone can see that. You are gentle and kind, and you work hard to build something good. What happened before does not define you." He looked down at their joined hands, and she saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "You are a good woman, Fiona Crawford, better than I deserve, but I want you to stay away from me for a while until those men move on. I do not want you caught up if they do decide to cause trouble." "No," Fiona said firmly. "I am not abandoning you. If they come, you should not face them alone." "Fiona," he started, but she cut him off. "I mean it, Emmett. You have become important to me. I am not going to pretend otherwise, so I will not stay away, but I will be careful. We will both be careful." Something changed in his face, a softening, a warmth that transformed his hard features into something almost vulnerable. "You have become important to me too," he said quietly, "more important than I ever intended. I see you watching me work, and it makes me want to build something better, something worthy. This house, Fiona. I am building it for you." Her breath caught in her throat. "What?" "From the first day I saw you in that doorway, I knew. I tried to tell myself it was foolish, that you could never want someone like me, but I could not help it. Every board I place, every beam I raise, I am thinking about you in this house, about a life we could have together. I know it is too much, too soon, and I have no right to assume anything. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand what this means to me." Fiona felt tears spill down her cheeks, hot and unexpected. "Emmett Jensen, are you telling me you are building me a house?" "Yes, madam," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you will have it, if you will have me." She laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and disbelief. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you are kind and brave and beautiful. I know you see me as more than just the violence in my past. I know when you bring me water in the middle of a hot day, it feels like the best thing that ever happened to me. I know I want to spend the rest of my life earning the right to be the man you deserve." Fiona could not speak. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his broad chest, feeling the solid strength of him and the rapid beating of his heart. His arms came around her, tentatively at first, then with more certainty, holding her as though she were something precious and fragile. They stood like that as full darkness fell around them, two people finding something unexpected and profound in a dusty Texas town. Finally, Fiona pulled back enough to look up at him. "We should get you a gun, just in case those men do try something." Emmett smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Yes, madam, I reckon you are right about that." The next morning, Fiona convinced her father to sell Emmett a used Colt revolver and a box of ammunition at cost. Her father asked no questions, just nodded with understanding and wrapped the weapon carefully before handing it over. Emmett took it with obvious reluctance, the weight of it seeming to bring back memories he would rather have left buried. But he strapped the gun belt around his waist and practiced drawing a few times behind the store where no one would see. His movements were smooth and practiced, speaking to experience Fiona wished he did not have. The three drifters struck that very night. Fiona was awakened by the sound of breaking glass and men's voices shouting, rough and aggressive. She rushed to her window and saw flames licking at the partial walls of Emmett's house, fire catching on the dry timber and spreading fast. Her heart seized with terror, not for the house but for Emmett, whom she could see emerging from his tent by Hickory Creek, silhouetted against the orange glow of the fire. Without thinking, Fiona grabbed her father's rifle from the rack by the door and ran outside in her nightgown, her bare feet slapping against the wooden sidewalk. She saw the three men clearly now, spreading coal oil and tossing lit rags, their faces twisted with malicious glee. One of them saw Emmett approaching and drew his gun, and Fiona raised the rifle to her shoulder with shaking hands. "Step away from that house!" she shouted, her voice carrying across the night air. All four men, the three drifters and Emmett, turned to stare at her. "I have got you in my sights, and I am a fair shot. My father made sure of that. So you best think hard about what you do next." The man with his gun pointed at Emmett hesitated, clearly not having expected resistance from a woman in a nightgown. That moment of hesitation was all Emmett needed. He moved with shocking speed, closing the distance and striking the gun from the man's hand with one massive fist. The drifter went down hard, clutching his broken fingers and howling. The other two scattered, but Emmett was faster, grabbing one by the collar and lifting him clear off the ground with one arm. "You tried to burn down my house," he said, his voice deadly calm. "The house I am building for the woman I love. That was a mistake." He threw the man into the dirt with enough force to knock the wind from him, then turned to face the third, who had drawn his own gun and was aiming with shaking hands. Before Fiona could react, before Emmett could move, a shot rang out. But it was not the drifter's gun that had fired. Her father stood in the doorway of the store, his own rifle smoking, and the drifter's weapon fell from nerveless fingers as he clutched his arm where the bullet had grazed him. "Town does not take kindly to arsonists," her father called out, "and I take even less kindly to men who threaten my daughter's happiness. Now all three of you best clear out before I decide to aim center mass next time." The drifters did not need to be told twice. They stumbled away into the darkness, leaving their burning work behind. Fiona dropped the rifle and ran to Emmett, who was already grabbing buckets and rallying the neighbors who had been awakened by the commotion. Together they formed a bucket line from the creek, passing water hand over hand, throwing it on the flames with desperate determination. The fire had caught well, but Emmett had built with thick timber and careful joints, and the structure was more resistant than the drifters had probably expected. It took nearly 2 hours to get the fire fully extinguished, and when the sun rose over Llano that morning, the house stood damaged but intact. The eastern wall was badly charred, and part of the roof frame had collapsed, but the bones of the structure remained solid. Emmett stood amid the smoking wreckage, his face streaked with soot and ash, surveying the damage with an expression Fiona could not read. She approached him slowly, her nightgown filthy and her feet cut from running barefoot through the street. "Emmett?" He turned to her, and she saw tears tracking through the soot on his face. "They almost destroyed it, almost took away what I was building for you." "But they did not," Fiona said firmly, taking his blackened hands in hers. "The house still stands. You built it too well for them to tear it down so easily, and we will rebuild what was damaged. Together, "We?" he asked, his voice breaking on the word. "We," she confirmed. "If you will have me, if you meant what you said about building this for us." Emmett pulled her against him, heedless of the ash and soot covering them both. "I meant every word. God help me, Fiona. I love you. I have loved you since the first moment I saw you standing in that doorway. I will spend every day of my life being worthy of you if you will let me." "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "And you do not have to earn anything. You are already worthy. You have always been worthy." They stood together in the smoking remains of their almost destroyed dream, holding each other as the town slowly came back to life around them. Her father approached eventually, tactfully clearing his throat. "Well," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "I suppose I should ask about your intentions toward my daughter, Mr. Jensen." Emmett straightened, keeping one arm around Fiona but meeting her father's eyes directly. "My intentions are honorable, sir. I want to marry her, with your permission. I want to finish this house and fill it with a life and a family. I want to give her everything she deserves." Her father nodded slowly, then extended his hand. "Then you have my blessing, though I expect you will take care of her properly." "I will protect her with my life," Emmett said, shaking her father's hand with his soot-covered one. "I swear that to you." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church at the edge of Llano, officiated by the circuit preacher who came through once a month. Fiona wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and only slightly altered to fit her frame, and carried wildflowers Emmett had picked from the hills that morning. He wore new clothes purchased from a merchant in the next town, his long hair neatly trimmed, though still falling past his collar, his broad shoulders barely fitting in the jacket. When he saw her walking down the aisle on her father's arm, his eyes filled with tears and he mouthed the words, "Thank you," to whoever might be listening, God or fate or simple chance. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor and cherish through all the days of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Emmett kissed her with a tenderness that belied his massive strength, and Fiona felt complete in a way she had not known was possible. The whole town attended the celebration afterward, a simple affair with music and dancing and too much food, everyone toasting the new couple and wishing them well. That night, Emmett carried Fiona across the threshold of the house he had built for her. It was not completely finished, some interior walls still needed, the floor not yet fully sanded, but it was habitable and it was theirs. He had spent every spare moment since the fire repairing the damage and pushing forward with the construction, working even harder than before, driven by love and determination. The bedroom was complete, furnished with a hand-built bed frame and mattress stuffed with cotton batting, and Fiona had sewn curtains from fabric her father had given them as a wedding gift. Emmett set her down gently in the middle of their new bedroom, his hands trembling slightly. "I have never been with a woman," he admitted, his voice low. "I want to do right by you, but I am not sure I know how." Fiona felt a surge of love for this strong man who was brave enough to admit vulnerability. "Neither have I," she said. "We will learn together. That is what marriage is, learning together." What passed between them that night was tender and awkward and beautiful, two people discovering each other with patience and care. Emmett was gentle despite his size, constantly asking if she was all right, if he was hurting her, his concern touching her deeply. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, skin against skin, breathing in rhythm. "I never thought I could have this," Emmett said into the darkness. "After what I did in Colorado, I thought I had used up any right to happiness. But then I saw you, and something in me knew I could be better, could be the man you needed." Fiona ran her fingers through his long hair, loving the feel of it. "You were always that man, Emmett. You just needed to believe it yourself. The past does not own you unless you let it." He turned to kiss her forehead. "I am going to make you happy, Fiona Jensen. I promise you that." "You already have," she whispered. "You already have." The weeks turned into months and their life together settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. Emmett found work with a local rancher who needed help building new barns and outbuildings, his skill with timber and carpentry in high demand. He brought home wages that, combined with Fiona's continued work at her father's store, allowed them to finish the house and begin saving for the future. Fiona had never been happier, waking each morning in the arms of the man she loved, working through the day with purpose, returning home each evening to a meal shared and hours spent talking or reading or simply being together. In September, Fiona missed her monthly courses and began feeling ill in the mornings. She recognized the signs. having helped her father's customers through numerous pregnancies over the years, but she waited another month to be sure before telling Emmett. She chose a quiet evening when they were sitting together on the porch he had built onto the front of the house, watching the sun set over the Texas hills. "Emmett," she said, taking his large hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "we are going to have a baby." She felt his whole body go rigid, every muscle tensing. For a long moment he did not speak, did not even seem to breathe. Then he turned to her with eyes so full of emotion she thought he might break apart. "A baby, truly?" "Truly," she confirmed. "Around April, the doctor thinks." Emmett swept her up in his arms, lifting her clear off the porch chair, spinning her around with a whoop of pure joy that echoed off the hills. "We are having a baby, Fiona. We are going to be parents." "Careful," she laughed, though her heart soared at his reaction. "Do not spin me too much or I will be sick on you." He set her down immediately, concern flooding his features. "Are you all right? Should you be sitting down? Do you need anything? Water? Food?" "I am fine," she assured him, touched by his instant protectiveness. "The morning sickness is not too bad, and the doctor says I am healthy. I just need to rest more and eat well." "You will rest," Emmett declared. "You will rest all you need. I will talk to your father tomorrow about you working less at the store. You will stay home and take care of yourself and our baby." Fiona started to protest, then saw the determination in his eyes and realized arguing would be pointless. Besides, the idea of spending more time at home, preparing for their child, did sound appealing. "All right," she agreed. "But I am not an invalid. I can still do things around the house." "Of course," he said quickly. "I just want to make sure you are safe, that you both are safe." That night, lying in bed with Emmett's hand resting protectively on her stomach, Fiona felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her. How could one person be so blessed to find love so profound, a home so solid, a future so bright? She thought about the mountain man who had come to Llano hauling timber, driven by grief and guilt, seeking redemption in physical labor. She thought about how she had watched him, day after day, never knowing he was building her a future with every log he carried, every board he placed. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Emmett became even more protective, barely letting Fiona lift anything heavier than a teacup, rushing home from work each day to make sure she had everything she needed. He built a cradle from the finest wood he could find, sanding it until the surface was smooth as silk, carving delicate designs into the headboard with painstaking care. He built shelves for the baby's room and a changing table and a small chest for clothes and blankets. Fiona sewed and knitted, her hands constantly busy creating tiny garments and soft blankets. Her father was beside himself with excitement at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, constantly bringing by gifts and supplies and offering unsolicited advice about child rearing that Emmett listened to with patient attention. The whole town seemed to share in their joy, women stopping by with hand-me-down baby clothes and advice, men clapping Emmett on the back and teasing him about sleepless nights to come. In April of 1879, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the following afternoon, Fiona gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Emmett was there throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement even as she gripped his fingers hard enough to leave marks. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Fiona's arms, both parents wept openly. "He is perfect," Emmett breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one massive finger. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Fiona's grandfather, with James as a middle name for Emmett's father. Thomas James Jensen, born into a house built by his father's hands and his parents' love. Emmett held his son with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone so large, cradling the tiny body against his broad chest, singing soft songs in a voice Fiona had never heard him use before. She watched through tired eyes and felt her love for him deepen even further, seeing him transformed by fatherhood into something even more beautiful than he had been before. The early months of Thomas's life were exhausting but joyful. Emmett continued working during the day, but rushed home every evening, taking the baby from Fiona so she could rest, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint despite having no experience with infants. He would sit in the rocking chair he had built and tell his son stories about the mountains where he had grown up, about the tall pines and cold streams, and the way snow looked when it covered everything in white. Fiona would listen from the kitchen or the bedroom and smile, knowing Emmett was making peace with his past by sharing it with his son. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the house filled with the sounds of childhood, laughter and crying. and the patter of small feet on the wooden floors Emmett had laid. They added to the house as well, Emmett building an additional bedroom and expanding the kitchen, always planning for a larger family, though they agreed to wait before having another child. Life was good and full, and rich in ways that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with love. On Thomas's second birthday, Fiona discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less of a surprise but no less welcome. Emmett received it with the same joy as before, immediately beginning plans to expand the house further. Their daughter, Ruth Ann, was born in January of 1882 during a rare Texas snowstorm that left the hills white and pristine. She came into the world more quickly than her brother, as though impatient to begin life, and she proved to be a spirited child from the very start. With 2 children, the house that Emmett had built became truly a home, filled with noise and mess and boundless energy. Thomas adored his little sister, constantly wanting to help care for her and protect her, already showing signs of his father's protective nature. Emmett continued to work and build, his reputation as a craftsman spreading throughout the region, and Fiona managed the household with the same competence she had brought to her father's store. Her father, now growing older, had turned the store over to a younger man and spent most of his time doting on his grandchildren, often watching them so Fiona and Emmett could have evenings alone together. On one such evening in the spring of 1883, they sat together on the porch as they had so many times before, watching the sun set over the hills. 5 years had passed since Emmett had first arrived in Llano hauling timber, 5 years since Fiona had first watched him work and wondered about the quiet mountain man with the wounded eyes. "Do you remember the first time I brought you water?" Fiona asked, her head resting on Emmett's shoulder. "I remember everything about you," Emmett replied. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I remember being terrified to talk to you because I thought you would see right through me to all the broken parts inside." "I did see them," Fiona said softly. "I saw them and I loved you anyway. I loved you because of them, not in spite of them. They made you who you are." Emmett was quiet for a moment, then said, "I used to have nightmares about Colorado, about the men I killed. I would wake up in the middle of the night seeing their faces. But I have not had those dreams in over a year now. You and the children, this life we have built, it has healed me in ways I never thought possible. That is because you let it heal you," Fiona pointed out. "You could have held on to that pain, let it poison everything, but you chose to build instead, literally and figuratively. You built this house, you built our family, you built a new life. I built it for you," he said, echoing his words from that night so long ago when he had first confessed his feelings. "Every piece of it for you." She lifted her head to kiss him, tasting the familiar warmth of him. "And I love you for it, more than words can say." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the sounds of their children sleeping inside drifting out through the open windows. This house that Emmett had built with his own hands, hauling timber from sunup to dark, had become the center of their world, the foundation upon which they had built everything that mattered. Fiona thought about that first morning when she had seen him carrying an impossibly large log across the dusty street, thought about how she had watched his back as he worked day after day, never knowing she was watching his future take shape board by board. As the years passed, Emmett and Fiona's family continued to grow and flourish. They had one more child, another son they named William, born in 1885 when Thomas was 6 and Ruth Ann was 3. With 3 children, the house became wonderfully chaotic, always full of noise and activity and love. Emmett expanded it twice more, adding a proper dining room and a larger porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the building, creating space for their growing family to spread out while still remaining close. Emmett's work as a carpenter and builder became well established throughout the region. Ranchers and townspeople sought him out for their most important projects, knowing his reputation for quality craftsmanship and honest dealing. He took pride in his work but never let it consume him the way timber hauling once had. His family came first, always, and he made sure to be home each evening for supper and bedtime stories. Made sure to take Sundays off to spend entirely with Fiona and the children. Fiona herself became known as one of the wisest women in Llano, the person other mothers came to for advice about raising children or managing a household. She maintained a garden that was the envy of the town, kept their home spotless despite 3 rambunctious children, and still found time to volunteer at the church and help neighbors in need. She and Emmett worked as partners in all things, making decisions together, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating victories as a team. Thomas grew into a strong, responsible boy who adored his father and wanted to learn everything Emmett could teach him about building and working with wood. By the time he was 10, he was helping Emmett on job sites during summer months, learning to measure and cut and plane boards with his father's patient guidance. Ruth Ann proved to be as spirited as her birth had suggested, constantly getting into mischief but with a heart of gold that made it impossible to stay angry with her. She had her mother's quick mind and her father's determination, a combination that promised interesting years ahead. Young William was still finding his way, a quieter child than his siblings, thoughtful and careful in all he did. In the summer of 1890, when Emmett was 41 and Fiona 34, they made plans to expand their property. Emmett had saved enough money to purchase additional land adjacent to their house, and he wanted to build a workshop separate from the house where he could take on larger projects and teach Thomas more advanced techniques. It would also give them room for a proper barn and perhaps some livestock, creating more self-sufficiency for the family. The project took most of the summer and fall, with Emmett and Thomas working side by side to clear ground and haul timber just as Emmett had done alone all those years ago. Fiona would watch them from the kitchen window or the porch, seeing the easy partnership between father and son, remembering another time when she had watched a solitary mountain man work from sunup to dark, building her a future. Now that same man was building a future for his son, passing down not just skills but values, teaching Thomas the dignity of honest labor and the satisfaction of creating something with your own hands. One afternoon, Fiona brought them both water and sandwiches, finding them examining the frame of the new workshop with critical eyes. Thomas, now 11 and already showing signs of his father's height and build, was pointing out a joint that he thought might be stronger if they angled it differently. Emmett listened carefully, then nodded and showed his son how to make the adjustment. "You are a natural at this," Emmett told Thomas, pride evident in his voice. "Better than I was at your age. You have got real talent, son." Thomas beamed at the praise, and Fiona felt her heart swell watching them. This was what Emmett had been building all along, not just a house or a workshop, but a legacy, a way of life based on integrity and hard work and love, a foundation that would support not just their own children but generations to come. That evening, after the children were in bed, Emmett found Fiona in their bedroom, brushing out her long auburn hair in front of the mirror. He came up behind her, running his hands down her shoulders, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "Have I told you today that I love you?" he asked. "Only 3 or 4 times," she replied, smiling, "but I never get tired of hearing it." He turned her around to face him, his expression serious. "I mean it, Fiona. Every day I wake up and I cannot believe I get to have this life. You, our children, this home. Sometimes it feels like a dream I might wake up from." "It is not a dream," she assured him, taking his face in her hands. "It is real, and it is ours, and it is built to last. Just like this house, just like everything you create." "We create," he corrected. "I could not have any of this without you. You make me want to be better, to do better. You always have." She pulled him down for a kiss, deep and tender, a kiss that still held the passion of new love even after 12 years of marriage. When they finally pulled apart, Fiona rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever think about that first summer?" she asked. "When you came here and started building?" "All the time," Emmett admitted. "I think about how alone I was, how lost I felt. I think about seeing you that first morning and feeling something shift inside me, like maybe I could have a future after all. I think about every time you brought me water or food, how those small acts of kindness meant more to me than you could have known." "I knew," Fiona said softly. "I saw it in your eyes, even when you tried to hide it. I saw you, Emmett Jensen, all of you, and I loved what I saw." He held her tighter, and she felt moisture on her hair where his tears fell. This strong man who had built their world with his bare hands, who had hauled timber from sunup to dark to create something beautiful out of pain and loss, who had become the best husband and father she could have imagined. He was her mountain man, and she was his reason for building, and together they had created something that would outlast them both. The years continued to roll by with the steady inevitability of seasons changing. Thomas, Ruth Ann, and William grew from children into young adults, each finding their own path while remaining close to their parents and each other. Thomas, as expected, followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a skilled carpenter and builder in his own right. By the time he was 18, he was taking on his own projects alongside Emmett. the two of them working as true partners. He courted and married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch, and Emmett built them a house as a wedding gift, just as he had built the original house for Fiona all those years ago. Ruth Ann proved to have a gift for healing and became an apprentice to the town doctor, one of the first women in the region to study medicine seriously. She was fierce and determined and compassionate, traits inherited from both her parents. She eventually married a schoolteacher who appreciated her independence and intelligence, and they settled in Llano, close enough to visit frequently but far enough to have their own life. William, the quietest of the three, surprised everyone by developing a passion for ranching. He hired on with a large ranch outside of town and worked his way up through sheer dedication and competence. He married later than his siblings, choosing a rancher's daughter who was as skilled with horses and cattle as he was. They took over management of her family's ranch when her father retired, turning it into one of the most successful operations in the region. Fiona and Emmett watched their children grow and thrive with immense pride and satisfaction. They became grandparents in due course, Thomas and his wife presenting them with 2 granddaughters, Ruth Ann having a son and daughter, William eventually having 3 boys. The house that Emmett had built became the gathering place for the entire extended family, especially during holidays and special occasions. It had to be expanded yet again to accommodate everyone, with Emmett and Thomas working together to add another wing with additional bedrooms and a larger common room. Fiona's father passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1895, having lived long enough to see his grandchildren grown and meet his great-grandchildren. His death was expected but still painful, and Fiona mourned the loss of the man who had raised her and supported her marriage to Emmett without hesitation. Emmett was a rock during that time, handling arrangements and comforting Fiona with the same gentle strength he had shown since the day they met. As Emmett and Fiona themselves grew older, they found joy in simpler pleasures. Morning coffee on the porch watching the sunrise. Evening walks around their property, Emmett pointing out repairs or improvements he wanted to make, Fiona suggesting plantings for the garden. Reading together by lamplight, Emmett still preferring poetry while Fiona enjoyed novels. Making love with the comfortable familiarity of long partnership, still tender, still meaningful, on a warm May evening in 1900, 22 years after Emmett had first arrived in Llano hauling timber. He and Fiona sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Emmett was 51 now, his long hair gone almost entirely gray, his body still strong but showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. Fiona was 44, her auburn hair streaked with silver, her face lined but still beautiful, still the woman who had captured his heart that first morning. "Do you regret anything?" Fiona asked. Watching the children chase each other around the oak tree Thomas had planted years ago. "About leaving Colorado, coming here the life we have had?" Emmett did not even have to think about his answer, not for 1 second. "Every choice I made that led me to you was the right choice. Every board I laid, every nail I drove, every drop of sweat I shed building this house was worth it 1,000 times over." "The house almost did not make it," Fiona reminded him, "when those men tried to burn it down." "But it did make it," Emmett countered, "because I built it strong, and because you stood beside me when it mattered most. That is what marriage is, Fiona. It is building something together and protecting it together and making sure it stands no matter what tries to tear it down." She leaned against him, fitting into the curve of his shoulder as perfectly as she had that first night when he confessed he was building the house for her. "You know what I remember most clearly? Watching you work that first summer. Watching you haul those massive logs as though they weighed nothing. Watching the way you moved, so purposeful and determined. I knew you were building something important, but I did not know I was watching you build my entire future." Emmett kissed the top of her head. "You watched my back," he said softly, "literally and figuratively. You saw me when I was trying to hide. You brought me water when I was parched, food when I was hungry, hope when I was lost. You gave me a reason to build something that would last instead of just running from my past." "We built it together," Fiona corrected. "Maybe you laid the boards and raised the beams, but I was there with you in spirit every moment. This house, this life, this family, it is ours, equal parts you and me." "Equal parts," Emmett agreed, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and purple, the same colors that had graced the sky that evening so many years ago when Fiona had first brought him supper and he had first admitted what he was really building. As the years continued to pass, Emmett and Fiona settled into the comfortable rhythm of their later years together. Emmett eventually reduced his work schedule, taking on only special projects that interested him or that his son Thomas needed help with. He spent more time on the porch, watching the world go by, whittling small toys for his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, content in a way that would have seemed impossible to the grieving, guilt-ridden man who had arrived in Llano hauling timber all those decades ago. Fiona remained active longer, maintaining her garden and hosting family gatherings, serving as the matriarch of their sprawling family with grace and wisdom. She taught her granddaughters to sew and cook, passed down family recipes and stories, made sure everyone knew they were loved and valued. She and Emmett would often sit together in the evenings, her knitting or mending while he whittled, comfortable in silence or talking about memories and plans, and the everyday details of life. In the spring of 1912, Emmett's health began to fail. He developed a persistent cough that would not go away, and the doctor diagnosed him with consumption, likely from years of breathing sawdust and working in all weather. The diagnosis was not a surprise. Many men who worked with timber developed similar problems, but it was still a blow. Emmett faced it with the same quiet courage he had faced everything else, refusing to complain or burden his family with worry. Fiona nursed him through the declining months with fierce devotion, just as he had cared for her through 3 pregnancies and countless illnesses over the years. She made sure he was comfortable, brewed special teas Ruth Ann recommended, read to him when he was too weak to hold a book himself. Their children and grandchildren visited frequently, the house constantly full of family who wanted to spend time with the patriarch while they still could. On a warm June morning in 1913, 64 years old, and surrounded by his entire family, Emmett Jensen passed away peacefully, in the bed he had built in the house he had constructed for the woman he loved. His last words were to Fiona, spoken in a whisper only she could hear. "Thank you for giving me a reason to build something beautiful." Fiona held him as he died, tears streaming down her face, her heart breaking even as she felt profound gratitude for the life they had shared. They buried him in the Llano cemetery under a simple headstone that read, Emmett Jensen, 1849–1913. Loving husband, father, grandfather, builder of homes and hearts. The months after Emmett's death were the hardest of Fiona's life. She had lost her father years ago, had lost friends and neighbors over time, but losing Emmett felt like losing part of herself. They had been married 35 years, had built a life and family together, had shared joys and sorrows and countless ordinary moments that added up to something extraordinary. The house felt empty without his presence, too quiet without his deep voice and heavy footsteps, but Fiona was not alone. Her children rallied around her, Thomas especially making sure she had everything she needed, taking over maintenance of the house and property that Emmett had always handled. Ruth Ann visited daily, checking on her mother's health and spirits. William came by weekly with his family, filling the house with the noise and chaos of young children that reminded Fiona of when her own were small. Slowly, painfully, Fiona learned to live without Emmett while still honoring his memory. She tended the house he had built with meticulous care, making sure it remained solid and beautiful, a testament to his skill and dedication. She told stories about him to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, making sure they knew the kind of man he had been, the values he had lived by, the love he had shown his family every single day. She lived in that house for 10 more years, watching her family continue to grow and flourish, secure in the knowledge that Emmett's legacy lived on not just in the physical structure he had built but in the lives of everyone he had touched. She taught her grandchildren that love was not just words or feelings but actions, the daily choice to show up and do the hard work of building something that would last. She taught them that redemption was possible, that past mistakes did not have to define your future, that you could build something beautiful even from a foundation of pain. In the fall of 1923, at the age of 67, Fiona's own health began to fail. Her heart, the doctor said, weakened from a lifetime of work and worry and love, was simply wearing out. She faced death with the same quiet dignity Emmett had shown, surrounded by family in the bedroom where they had shared so many nights together, in the house that had been the center of their world, on a crisp October morning, with her children holding her hands and her grandchildren gathered around. Fiona Crawford Jensen closed her eyes and smiled as though seeing something beautiful. Her last words were simple but profound. "I am coming home, Emmett. I watched your back and you built it for me. and it was the best thing that ever happened to either of us. They buried her next to Emmett in the Llano cemetery, their headstones side by side, marking the resting place of two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that transcended time and death. The house Emmett had built remained in the family for generations, passed down from Thomas to his children and then to theirs, always maintained with reverence and care, always serving as a reminder of what two people could create when they chose to build together. The story of the mountain man who hauled timber from sunup to dark and the woman who watched his back became a family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, embellished slightly with each generation but always holding the essential truth at its core. That love is an action, that building something beautiful requires patience and dedication and faith, that the greatest legacy we can leave is not wealth or fame, but the example of how we chose to live and love. The house still stands in Llano, Texas, more than a century after Emmett Jensen first laid its foundation. It has been modified and updated over the years, modernized in necessary ways, but the bones of it remain exactly as Emmett built them. Solid timber and careful joints that have withstood decades of weather and use. The family that currently lives there, descended from Thomas and carrying the Jensen name, knows the story of their great-great-grandparents and the love that built the walls around them. On warm evenings when the sun sets over the Texas hills in shades of pink and gold, you can still feel something in that house, a presence or memory, or simply the echo of profound love. It is the spirit of the mountain man who came seeking redemption and found it in the eyes of an auburn-haired woman. It is the spirit of the woman who saw beyond violence and pain to the gentle soul beneath. It is the accumulated weight of all those days Emmett hauled timber from sunup to dark while Fiona watched and somehow knew, that he was building it all for her. Their love story ended, as all mortal love stories must, with death and grief and separation. But it also continued, living on in the house that still stands, in the descendants who still gather there, in the example they set of what it means to truly love another person, to build something together that outlasts the builders. Emmett Jensen hauled timber and laid boards and raised beams, creating a physical structure that would shelter generations. But what he really built was something far more important, a legacy of love, redemption, and the quiet courage it takes to start over, to believe in the possibility of happiness, to choose building over destruction, hope over despair. And Fiona Crawford watched his back, protected him when danger came, stood beside him through all the years that followed, proving that true partnership means showing up every day to tend the thing you have built together. She knew he built it for her, but she also knew she helped build it for him, that every meal she brought, every word of encouragement she spoke, every moment she chose him was another board laid, another nail driven into the foundation of their shared life. In the end, that is what makes their story worth telling and retelling. Not the drama of fire and danger, not even the romance of unexpected love, but the simple, profound truth that two broken people found each other and chose, every single day, to build something beautiful together. They transformed pain into purpose, guilt into grace, loneliness into love. They proved that it is never too late to start over, never too late to find redemption, never too late to build the life you were meant to live. Their house stands as testament to that truth, solid and enduring, built to last by a man who hauled timber from sunup to dark, and loved by a woman who watched his back and knew exactly what he was creating. It stands as a monument not to wealth or status but to something far more valuable. The transformative power of love expressed through daily acts of dedication, the miracle of two hearts finding each other and choosing to build a home not just in wood and nails but in commitment, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. And somewhere in whatever place souls go when bodies fail, Emmett and Fiona are together still, perhaps sitting on a porch that never needs repair, watching a sun that never truly sets, holding hands weathered by time but joined forever by a love that was strong enough to build a house, raise a family, and create a legacy that continues to inspire everyone who hears their story. The mountain man in his builder's hands, the woman with the auburn hair and knowing eyes. The house that stands in Llano, Texas, built from timber and love and the absolute certainty that some things are meant to last forever. Their story is complete, their house still stands, their love endures, and that, in the end, is the very best kind of happily ever after.